Hi guys, I am Roro now. This video is about what if the Straw Hats lost in the middle of the sea part 2. Please like, subscribe and share Roro Now TV for more One Piece fanfiction videos. Sanji was lighting a fresh cigarette. As he exhaled a much-needed breath of tobacco, he decided to take the crew's mind off the depressing recording. It's getting pretty dark, and this place is poorly lit. Not to mention there's giant gaps in the architecture. We'd be wise to get somewhere safer if we're spending the night out here. Sanji's right, Robin said. Actually, we were going to tell you right before being attacked up here. We lucked out, and found a safe house downstairs. Nami explained. This way, my friends. Brooke opened a metallic door in the floor of the room's corner, and held it open for the others. They climbed down a ladder and into the darkness. The sanctuary was several rooms wide. It looked much like the rest of the areas they had encountered, and was marked by only two large differences. The first significant difference being that every wall, ceiling and floor was isolated with glass. The second was that this was an honest-to-God living area. The team had entered through a room that seemed to solely exist for the purpose of leading upstairs and downstairs. Brooke secured the lock on the top entrance as a precaution, as he was last inside. Glass isolation. What a clever precaution. Not a single corpse in here, either. That's a good sign. Robin sounded genuinely relieved. Please stop talking about corpses, Robin. Chopper cried out while trying to keep up with her huge strides. Hey now. Don't be like that. We have feelings too. Brooke called out to the reindeer in fake anger. Robin chuckled innocently. They had all looked over the other three rooms, which consisted of a kitchen, a bathroom, and a single bedroom filled with bunks. She glanced over at Zoro, who was leaving to walk back to the entrance area. The others were too busy selecting where they wanted to sleep to notice as she slipped out to follow him. Zoro took a deep breath in as he heard her close the door of the enclosure furthest from everyone else. Please, she said softly, don't worry too much about what happened. I slipped up, Mies. The point was for me to protect you while you did your work. I failed colossally. He didn't usually interrupt her like this. Robin stared at him. She was still as a sculpture as she replied. I've had people I care about die for me before, and I barely made it through those times. There was a silence. She went on. Being the cause of someone's death makes what you have left of your life into torture. Her voice betrayed the wound she'd hidden away the moment Sanji dropped out of the ceiling to rescue them. The searing pain wormed its way out of the depths of her. Zoro had been grimacing more and more progressively while listening to her speak. Someone else's sacrifice isn't your decision to make. He was barely maintaining his calm at this point. In order to be the world's greatest swordsman, you have to stay alive. Is the dream you and Kuina had not worth that much? The question hit him like a tidal wave from behind. Ruthlessly and suddenly. He turned to face her. He'd started speaking far louder than normal. You wanna bring up history? His frown had grown exceptionally defined. I thought you respected your own dream. He added venomously. Actually, how about you show some respect for what this crew chose? He had lost control and was yelling. We didn't declare war on the world government, to have you throw all of that work away for me. Her words were lodging in her closed-up throat again, as she struggled to get them out in a louder push of speech. I already lost my best friend to stay alive. She bit her lips in hesitation and fear. If the man his blood was boiling. Don't say another word, Robin. She started again from his aggression, as his body leaned itself imposingly towards her. His voice was now thundering throughout the room. Don't you get it? The daggers he was staring at her cut as his katana would. I failed as a swordsman, and as a man. Robin felt too much like his enemy again. His earrings swung in the cold air from the bodily force with which he had yelled. She stared at him in shock as Sanji and Luffy burst through the door. What the hell is going on here? Sanji sternly exclaimed, albeit nowhere near as full of anger as Zoro still was. Luffy stared at the swordsman in utter confusion and surprise. He'd never heard him scream at Robin in his life. Zoro responded in a still unpleasant tone. Nothing. I was just taking a breather. He began ascending the ladder they arrived via, and disappeared from sight through the door upstairs again. Nami had been standing behind the two young men at the door with her arms crossed. She looked at Robin in great concern, to whom words did not exist anymore. Only the deafening drum in her ribcage, as she came to her senses. She watched him disappear from sight once more. Her look was nearly blank, aside from the utter shock coloring her eyes. Robin collected herself as best as she could. Nami took a step toward her. Robin, she reached her hand out to touch her shoulder, but was interrupted, as she walked away and insisted, I'm okay. The tall woman headed for the bathroom. As she rinsed the edges of a dusty tub, the rusty water, untouched for who knows how long, cleared up. She had a bar of soap tucked away in her bag, no towel. She couldn't hear any of the others talking next door in the kitchen. Only the old, nearly jammed shower, the water pouring from out of it, and the squeakiness of her lathering her skin up. Do you know anything about this, Sanji-kun? Nami couldn't rid herself of the sickly knot in her stomach. Only that the two of them were in real trouble when Robin-chan contacted us. Chopper removed his hat, brushing out the freshly revealed fur atop his endearingly large head with his hoof. His high-pitched voice was taking on a stern edge again, as he tried to force himself to grow up on the spot. Something really bad must have happened, for Zoro to get so upset. The small doctor couldn't hide the sadness in his face. Yeah, he's always been hot-headed and rude, but this is unusual. Nami added, resisting the urge to let slip the secrets she was sitting on. She had only seen him so emotional twice before. If that idiot gets himself lost and killed out there all because of a temper tantrum, I'm going to kill him again myself. Sanji marched off to exit the same way as Zoro had left, for an evening smoke. Nothing else. Nami sighed softly, and Brooke had nothing to add. Robin turned off the water, she stood in the shower quietly. Less grimy, but still somber, and exhausted. Zoro, on the other hand, was the exact opposite of exhausted. The anti-hero was marching the same way they came. An unyielding, temperamental inferno, burning its way back into the very science lab which had humiliated him. A deep sense of satisfaction filled him progressively, with every step he took through the long passageway, despite the darkness of the evening obscuring his way. Not a bug in sight, still, he couldn't help but feel like there was something he had missed last time he was inside the tomb-like building. He continued walking in what he deemed to be the right direction. Of course, this meant that he found himself somewhere entirely new, and previously undiscovered. Zoro slashed another door in half. He kicked an old broken shelf out of the way, and was pleased with what greeted him from behind it. An armory, he flashed a somewhat evil smile, as he continued holding up a burning piece of wood he had lit with a match. Despite his wound-up mood as he stormed out of the glass shelter, he'd maintained enough sense in him to grab one of the matchboxes laying on the kitchen table. The walls of the small enclosure were lined with identical, unusual guns. Goddamned bird-brained swords bastard, irritated Sanji murmured, as he ran into the science lab. There were definitely some fresh footprints in the dust of the floor. He used the flashlight he'd borrowed off Nami to jog through the rest of the dark, following the steps. Please don't be upset with me, Nami Swan, Robin Kwan, he continued into the unpleasantly quiet void, shining the light right and left. If what I think is going on, I have to do what I have to do. Zoro inspected the end of one of the weapons from a few steps away. A canister. A fairly large one at that. Strapped to each and every one of the guns. The top of it had a cap in it, through which to fill the contraption. The question was, with what, exactly? Oi, Marimo. Zoro whipped around to see his blonde crewmate. Shit cook. What are you doing here? He walked up in annoyance and stood next to the green man. Me. If I didn't come after you, you'd wander off to the other side of the planet. What the hell are you doing walking away from everybody on your own like an idiot? Sanji casually tried yanking one of the guns in front of him off the wall, but the moment it came off its handle, the entire wall of guns rotated upwards, along with the segment of floor the two men were standing on. One somersault tumble and several bruises later, they were on the floor of a different room. Zoro shoved Sanji's face unkindly away from him as he got back up. The cook had fallen too close to him for his liking. He didn't manage to do so without Sanji yanking him down on his ass by the yukata in revenge. The two continued childishly horsing around, until a few all too bright spotlights in the room flickered on a few seconds later. Where the hell are we? Zoro uttered the rhetorical question, wincing, as he pretended he knew what any of the apparatus around him was. Sanji dusted his expensive suit off, and was just as confused. I don't know. In fact, I'm not sure I care until you tell me what the hell is happening with you and Robin. The swordsman froze in surprise. He said nothing, as he scanned a work table in the now brighter room. I was surprised to see you both acting like you did on the ship earlier, but there's only so much I can shrug off. The blonde had circled his way around Zoro, his hands still in his black pants as he did so. Oi, at least tell me something. The two men were staring one another down in a bright patch of room. The darkness of the room's edges seemed to close in on Zoro as absolutely nothing came to him. His mind was as of this moment actually blank, the way the chef loved to insinuate. He took a few seconds to think extremely hard, eventually fishing a sentence out of himself with difficulty. It's between me and her. Yeah, no duh. Zoro crossed his arms in front of himself, while staring into space instead of Sanji's insistent expression as he said. You're embarrassing yourself. Just drop it. Suit yourself, numbnuts, but I'm more versed in matters of women's hearts than you. I thought maybe I could offer you some kind of help. Zoro pouted angrily, and walked away to look at a map of the island on the wall. After a moment of silence, he said, this might interest Nami. While that is true, and I am taking it with me for that very reason, Sanji pulled the map from its frame, rolled it up and tucked it inside his dress shirt carefully. You're changing the subject, you shithead. As he did so, Zoro responded to his question. To Sanji's surprise, I'm still making sense of my issue with Robin. The chef was still rolling the map up to put in the pocket of his jacket. Not giving me much to work with, but I can't force you to tell me about it. Suit yourself. Sanji exhaled in indignation, and then added, "Ah God, I can't believe I'm saying this to you of all people." Sanji inhaled a defeated breath. With the way she's been looking at you, I wouldn't be too worried about gaining her favor. He had hoped to God in secret that Robin's looks of affection were her usual style of maternal display. A show of protectiveness, or camaraderie. Zoro's heart skipped a beat in secret. He wondered again why he kept having reactions like this. He was highly alarmed how obsessive he was. The euphoria and fuzzy, whatever the heck she was eliciting, was interesting, thrilling even. He would go so far as to say it could be pretty fun. The lack of control, however, was something he really was not here for. Especially the constant, near-insane inability to escape images of her which his brain was feeding him. Her gestures, even her style of walk. His internal soundtrack was a long audio compilation of things she'd said. Her name being spoken by other people immediately got his attention. The way her laughter felt like it was him laughing. His blood ran hot around her, but he didn't even feel angry. It was something else entirely. Something disgusting. He hated it and yet he needed more of it, a bit like the way he needed to eat and sleep. Robin had become a drug the likes of which there was no rehabilitation from. He'd lost his goddamned mind, and he loved it. And hated how he loved it. Sanji went on with his monologue. Let me remind you of something. I usually don't have to tell you because you know, but it's like you've forgotten for whatever reason. Zoro snapped out of his awkward mode of contemplation to find that he couldn't seem to move any part of his body. He listened to his annoyingly good friend. Manhood isn't an absence of failure. Okay, Sanji yelled at him. It's the presence of tenacity. Which you have no problem with. You're a stubborn, determined piece of shit. He hit Zoro on the back of the head. The swordsman turned his neck slightly to aim a dirty look at him. Sanji added, Robin's a genius, she'll know all of that. His green comrade's face softened to a minuscule degree. He inhaled. The shitty cook had some points, even if he had screamed derogation at him a few hours ago. Let's find a way out of here, Zoro said. He'd realized what he had to do. Oi, wait a second. Sanji called Zoro over. Look at this. He pointed his torch at a huge tank against a dark corner of the room. Zoro squinted and read the text Sanji was lighting up with his flashlight. The swordsman read it out loud. Weapon charge station. He looked back over at the gun now laying against the floor of the room they had landed in. The swordsman picked it up, and unscrewed the top of it. He held it under a tap on the side of the tank, and turned the rusty valve nearby. The pipes around the room gurgled, as the tank began to charge the weapon. The two men looked on in suspense, until they realized what was coming out of the tank. Water. Sanji tilted his upper body in confusion as he stared at it. Zoro wrinkled his forehead in slight disappointment. The two stood there for a moment in confusion, until the green-haired man understood. In a premature wave of delight at having outwitted Sanji, he exclaimed toughly, I know. Went on to hold the gun's charge opening to his nose, sniffing it cautiously. A big, malicious grin spread across his face. This isn't just regular water. It's seawater. Sanji caught on quickly, his face infected by the schadenfreude as he took the instrument from his comrade, eyeing it. Those bugs ate the amalgam fruit. Which means we gotta fill these up and hand 'em out. Zoro walked up to the wall they fallen through. He thought for a second, then found a lever. Although he was ready to be tossed unpleasantly and grabbed onto a handle to ensure a gentler fall, all the lever did was open a new door next to the wall him and Sanji had fallen through. Relieved, he carefully walked through it back to the room shelved with guns. After a lot of valve turning, a lot of wet hands, and after Sanji was forced to keep both eyes on his navigationally challenged brother in arms, they arrived exhausted, back at the shelter. Zoro was being insulted by Sanji as they walked into the kitchen, when Nami interrupted them. What the hell have you idiots been doing out there? She was slightly loud despite being audibly groggy. Do you know what time it is? She hissed at them, closing the door to the bedroom behind her. She put her hands on her hips, as she tried to convince herself she wasn't hallucinating from how tired she was. They were making some pretty asinine faces. Sanji and Zoro, on the same wavelength. Why do you both look so satisfied? Are you two even listening? Come upstairs. Bring a few empty backpacks. Zoro said, already 1 foot through the exit door. Once Nami had helped them carry the sea weapons down into the shelter and joined in their enthusiasm, she crouched holding open a bag. Eyed the new tools at their disposal. We just have to be very aware of the devil's fruit users on our side if we're going to use these. Agreed, Zoro added, just as Robin walked into the room. She was wearing a fresh shirt and skirt she had packed in case of need. Her hair was dry and clean. The room went completely silent. As she gently closed the door to the bedroom, she asked what the commotion was about, taking care not to wake her sleeping crewmates. Robin Kwan, we found guns to use against the gross swarms. Sanji's excited voice was only slightly louder than a whisper. A hint of a smile appeared on her, as she looked at the group surrounding the backpack while actively avoiding Zoro's face. Without warning, Nami grabbed Sanji by the bend of his arm and dragged him away toward the room with the bunks inside. Sanji-kun, it's time we went to get some rest too. He was far too convinced he was being flirted with, and overjoyed at her physical contact to notice Zoro was being left alone with Robin strategically. The solemn mood was not eased by them disappearing through the door. Familiar chestnut eyes looked into her glassy ones, as the swordsman gestured to the room furthest away from their other friends. She felt a slight relief from the absence of his usual sternly tensed brows, as she walked after him into the entrance hall. The far less tense temperamental man sighed quietly, then turned to face her as she closed yet another door behind her. I can't take back the way I spoke to you earlier. His head was lowered slightly. I lost control of my tone, and that shouldn't have happened. Robin was aware that language wasn't his strongest suit. She also knew that he hated admitting he was ever wrong. Which did put into perspective how much weight the conversation had. She waited patiently while he attempted to phrase his next sentence. His dark eyes fixed themselves on hers momentarily again, before shifting away in hesitation. He then turned his entire head, looking blatantly to the side in frustration. Unable to keep holding her gaze. Rubbed his hand across his lower face briefly, as if it would somehow magically untie the tongue behind his teeth. Damn it, she had no response for that. I've never dealt with this situation before. He was getting flushed, frowny, crossed his arms in front of his chest in some kind of inexplicable agony. He let out a brief, flustered huff as he leaned against the ladder behind him. Robin was genuinely confused now. You've never been stuck in a life or death situation with a crewmate? On Luffy's crew? No. Then what is it? Are you alright? There was a mix of confusion and concern on her face. He looked a little nervous suddenly. Conflicted. Was his voice shaking? I'm in love with you, he said. Robin's eyes widened in disbelief. What? He was blushing ferociously. I don't even care whether you feel the same. But I figured you should know. He looked extremely uncomfortable and completely out of his element as he explained. It clicked when I went to clear my head. It's why I lost my shit. It shouldn't have affected you negatively. He glanced back at her and further confusion washed over him. Wait, he said, forgetting his own nerves as he noticed. Are you crying? Robin laughed through the tears at the bamboozled expression on him. She inhaled and wiped her eyes. If you don't care whether I feel the same, I suppose there's no point in me saying it back. She asked in a choked voice. She was smiling unbearably hard. Well, I mean, if you decide to, I'll listen, I guess. The phrase was uttered by the swordsman with a shit-eating grin on his face. Well, whether you feel the same or not, I'm in love with you too. She laughed softly at the rude bastard. She wanted to slap him, simultaneously as she craved his arms wrapped around her. Her rude bastard. He neared her, mocking grin turning gradually into a genuine smile. Really? He asked, the flush returning with a vengeance to his skin. Yes, she said. The two had moved into each other's warm, tight embrace. His head leaned against her cheek, brows tensing again from all the unfamiliar sensations he was guarding against. Zoro pressed a firm kiss against her lips. He pulled her against himself as she leaned into his warm, firm grasp. Strands of raven hair hung next to one side of his face, as she cradled the sides of his head in her hands, and opened her mouth slightly to let their tongues brush each other in passing. He fought to suppress his strength as he squeezed the shape of her. Robin, on the other hand, was not holding back, which he completely felt. Don't break my ribcage, I need that to fight. He wheezed against her face, and she promptly loosened her hold. Sorry. He felt her cheeks push into her wondrous smile again, against his. What a mess of sensations. So annoying. He complained half-jokingly, his deep gruff voice unusually soft and normal in pitch as he pressed his mouth against her cheek again. He followed up with a deep, hungry inhale through the nose. Her scent made his head spin. Her slender fingers caressed his neck as she pressed her forehead against his. The heat of him was saving her from the chill of the bunker. Is that so? She asked coquettishly. He inhaled her scent drunkenly, dragging his hands slowly from beneath her shoulder blades, tracing their way down into the narrowest point of her very appealing waist. Okay then, I can go if it's annoying you too much. She teased. No, stay. He muttered flatly and immediately, resting his head in the curve of her shoulder in defeat. She obliged, the two blissfully feeling the synchronization of the beating in their chests. They were another secret richer, and very restlessly spry, when they ended up finally heading to bed like their exhausted friends. I'm hungry, Luffy whined, as he stretched himself across the table in the dim light of the bunker. It was morning. The group of Straw Hats knew this, because an all too energized to sleep well Robin had gotten out of bed and peeked her head out of the safety hatch trapdoor, staring out through a gap in a facade of the fortress. To her great surprise and enjoyment, a gorgeously haloed rising sun had ruled the sky. As she carefully climbed up out of the bunker, she'd noted the extremely blurred nature of it, likely from the strange fog light of the island. Robin had stood gazing out across the mess of foul trees, which in the pinkish-orange haze looked rather decorative. Zoro had been leaning against the wall of the kitchen when the love of his life returned through the door. He had been concerned with looking cool, still the joyous way her lips curled as she'd walked in on him had been infectious, and so he'd afforded himself the act of smiling at her warmly. Good morning, Robin had walked over merely slightly briskly and enthusiastically, all while doing her damnedest not to look desperate and obsessed. Giving the truth away for free like that would have been unfitting. She was a master assassin after all, with a certain degree of reputation to protect. Morning, he had responded. He had hoped his smile had hopefully been the right amount of expressive. How uncomfortable would she be? He'd wondered, if this whole situation went public today. Zoro had, without knowing whether he ought to, pulled her towards himself again, ready to straighten up and let go if somebody had walked in. Did you sleep well? She had asked. Not bad actually. His reply had been a cloudy blur lost amidst her thoughts, and so she had to replay the sound of his words in her mind. Search for their simple and obvious meaning. He broke the comfortable silence. What about you? Sleep well. This had been one of the few moments of the day when Zoro wasn't furrowing his brow. He had looked relaxed, something which had made Robin even more pleased. How odd it was. This new existence where the happiness of other people became her own. Just fine. Robin had been beginning to feel silly from how persistent her grinning had become. Yet it had become too much to even attempt suppressing. She'd been happy with the Straw Hats before, but her bursts of delight had been rarely so drawn out, or as glaringly written on her entire being. She had cupped his jaw in her hand, and like a tender female giraffe leaned herself 8 centimeters lower to kiss him wholesomely on the lips. For she had known, this might be the last chance to do so for a while. His behemoth desire for the woman before him had been large before she'd done this, but it had grown exponentially from contact with her lips. He hadn't pushed his hand against her beautiful neck, and therefore had not had the boon of feeling her healthy streaks of shining black hair or the warmth of her skin in his grip. Nor had they opened their mouths which fit together like puzzle pieces. He had not kissed her as deeply as would have been preferable, but he had stopped humoring his own rampant imagination, which had started feeding him flashes of rather unsavory and explicit activities. He had come to want her as badly as oxygen overnight. It was indeed cramping his very otherwise centered Zen style. Robin had leaned out of the kiss, and straightened out her dignified posture, with more blush on her cheeks than before. She enjoyed the sight of his face having turned a bright shade of tan pink. Your mind went somewhere fun, huh? She had chuckled. Shut up, he muttered in bashful annoyance. That had been before the rest of the bunker residents began filing out of the bedroom. Sanji, breakfast. The captain was performing, as though the Grim Reaper had come for him and he was begging for his life. Admittedly, this was quite fitting, as Brooke was gazing empty-socketed at him, in what only the skeleton himself knew was a state of pity. I'll make it. From your carcass. Sanji muttered. Nami was yawning as she phoned Usopp and Frankie, only to find they were having a great time swimming with the fishes in the Sunny's aquarium, quite literally. The starving crewmates agreed promptly, when Chopper declared it was time to venture onward and look for something to eat. He offered them medicinal mushrooms he had picked together with Sanji as a first aid against hunger, which had few effects aside from being nutritious and good against nausea. Something which Sanji was struggling with. Partly, he was highly annoyed with his captain's illogical demands. The other part of his onset of sickness arose from confusion at the fact that the archaeologist and the swordsman seemed to have made up, more than made up, they seemed extremely and uncharacteristically happy standing next to each other. Frankie peeled his goggles off his eyes to reveal his long rectangular eyelashes. The cyborg wiped some sweat off his forehead using his metal forearm. It was too early in the day to be upgrading the boiler system, he knew this. Still, something about the amazing scenic sunrise on the uncanny island had lured him out of bed. Even in the case that Usopp wants a shower, this'll take no more than 5 minutes. No problem, baby. It was a problem. 5 minutes into the project, his friend was walking into the room clad in nothing but a towel. Usopp's eyes were narrow as a 0.3 pencil line on a sheet of Japanese high school student paper. He screamed, "Hey, do you know how freaking cold the shower water is?" "Ah, Usopp. I'm just finishing a boiler upgrade, fix it now." "Okay." Frankie had rebrokered peace by fixing his hubris-born mistake when the sniper came out of the bathroom clean and once more donning his towel. He found his comrade talking to Robin via the communication snail in the dining room. She sounded vivacious despite the slight static of the audio the device was producing. "Yes, we found an exit through the fortress, and we appear to be back in the woods." "If that's what they can be called," Usopp interjected. "Those bug things, though, you're not afraid of getting overwhelmed by them?" "Ah, good morning, Usopp." Her charmingly warm tone evoked the image of her smiling face. Sanji jumped into the conversation to explain his and Zoro's adventure to the Going Sunny restricted party, in succinct form. He did it in a way that didn't particularly flatter or amuse the swordsman. His muttering curse aimed at the cook could be heard slightly farther from the microphone. "What's your current objective?" Frankie asked. "Well, we're short on food," said Robin. Nami spoke into the Den Den Mushi. "Sanji-kun brought a map back from his and Zoro's night excursion. Even though I have no idea what possessed them to go wandering around the lab without backup of any sort, and while I still want to kill these assholes, there happened to be some incredibly useful info charted on here. Can we hear about this info?" Frankie asked. "Yes. We're headed southwest where there looks to be a town hall with a cellar filled with provisions, food, more specifically." Sounds like there's no certainty you'll find any food there though. This place has been abandoned for a really long time. What makes you sure there'll be anything left down there?" "We're not certain. On the other hand, we're all far enough away from the ship that it'll take longer to get back to you two than it will to check this cellar. So I propose the following. We'll keep walking toward the cellar, and you and Usopp can use the tracking device to navigate towards our new location." "Sounds good. Might be good to stay in motion anyway, what with these horrible bugs on the loose, no?" "Yes. Speaking of which," said Robin, "don't let them bite you." Usopp turned pale, as Frankie bit the bait. "What happens when they do?" "You die," said Robin. Usopp developed a tremor. "You can't be serious, Robin." Zoro leaned in toward the Den Den Mushi and added, "Oh, she's serious. In fact, they can smell cowardice from a distance. It smells delicious. You can't just straight up make things up, Zoro." Nami called his bluff. "You mean Robin didn't make her statement up?" Usopp's towel fell off while he yelled at the snail phone. "Well, if it makes you feel better, the death is slow and uncomfortable," Robin said. She was relatively unfazed by the concept as usual. "What she's trying to say, Usopp," Chopper had motioned for the tall lady to lower the microphone for him, "is that it would take several hours for the venom to take full effect. So the moment you notice symptoms like nausea, fever, headache, and/or faintness, you should call us and let me know immediately. That way I can give you the antidote ASAP. I developed all those symptoms right as you listed them. Come back to Frankie and me, Chopper." Sanji bent down to Chopper's height for the sake of clarity. "He can't, not until you two get the ship further up the northeast coast of this weirdo island. Then I guess we'd better get this baby moving, and I guess you'd better cover your privates up, huh, Usopp?" All the crewmates on the other side of the phone looked at each other in confusion and surprise. Brooke was the only one who articulated what they were all thinking. Namely the phrase, "What? My towel fell down, I just had a shower." "You can calm down, Brooke. Ah, okay then. You had me there for a second, because who even knows what Frankie is into? Let me know if you ever wanna know. Ow. The cyborg robot did a provocative hip-swinging dance move as per usual. Robin got ever so slightly short with him. Chopper is right here. And what about it? What's Frankie into? The reindeer's huge eyes glistened in sheer curiosity. It's not relevant right now. Okay, nice chat. See you guys soon. Frankie turned the phone off. The ravenous mass hissed violently, as an animated sculpture of bugs fizzled away from the contact with seawater. He had just tried his newly acquired seawater weapon on it. Zoro, does it feel odd to use a gun instead of a sword? Chopper felt his voice ebb, in a feeble manner into the gigantic foggy plains. It seemed to never end on each side, one vast horizon of dead, hard-packed soil, which was very slowly turning back into the fluffier, more fertile insect-packed variety. Nah. Brook, Luffy, Chopper and Robin were walking in the center of the ring formation, surrounded by their other crewmates, all of which had an anti-devil's fruit weapon each. The crewmates moved below their regular speed, on account of the people standing at the back having to walk backwards, and at a slight angle, to keep from being surprised from the back. Zoro decided to elaborate on his curt answer to his reindeer friend. These guys are completely uninteresting to duel. Might as well get rid of them and go find better opponents ASAP. Nami squirted a stream of water at another incoming monster, this time shaped like a bull. Ha! Take that. The large being melted away completely with progressive attacks. I can see why Usopp likes that slingshot so much. She beamed, slightly mean, slightly proud. Robin felt the tension from earlier evaporate from her being. Although a new sense of unease crept over her. It was small, like a mouse, and it had smuggled its way into her. Mice are generally harmless. Of course, here the problem was that she didn't as of this moment feel like a body of flesh, blood and heat. She might have been a supercomputer made up of wires, rodent teeth did not mix well with her internal processing. Hey. Her crewmates tilted their heads slightly toward her, as if to pick up the ringing phone. Isn't it somewhat strange? The fact that they're evaporating, but more of them keep coming. Mice can carry pestilence. Perhaps it's best not to look a gift horse in the mouth, but that did cross my mind too, Robin-san. Said Brook. It's ominous, and it's all the more reason to get the hell out of here. Said Sanji. The devil's fruit monster attacks decreased in frequency, which made the crew comfortable enough to walk in a more regular line formation eventually. An indefinite amount of time later, the starving Straw Hats saw their first trace of hope in several hours. The fog had long since faded entirely, and led them through the same manner of dense flowery fields as they had landed in while arriving on the island. They had slowly been walking at an upwards incline of bouncy flower bed for a few minutes when their captain grew restless. Before anybody had time or energy to stop him, Luffy sprinted as far as he could, to the edge of what he noticed in time was a steep edge. Whew, that was a close one. He wiped his forehead, reeling from the sensation of his starvation mixing together with the adrenaline of almost tumbling down a steep incline of a cliff. Guys, it's the village. As the rest of his band of starving adventurers caught up, they noticed he was right. The sizable, now abandoned coastal village was linked to their high altitude by a long, winding, ancient stairwell. The construction had many a loose step, some of which were concealed by earth which had been patted down, presumably by animals, the odd human, and various changes in weather. The other thing the crew immediately noticed, was that the coastline below them was swarming with Navy officers, and a fair few Navy ships. They hissed at Luffy in unison. Keep your voice down, you'll draw their attention. Everyone in the group, save for Brook who stood by watching, dragged Luffy backward by various parts of his body, returning him somewhat down the slope from which they came, in hopes that he won't be seen by every Tom, Dick, Harry and Sally in a uniform below. Luffy, let me put this in a way that'll get through your thick head and deep into your subconscious. Nami managed, despite now being weaker bodied than normal, and her tone of voice being softer and quieter. He blinked, dazed as he stared at the baby blue sky. He'd fallen on his back into the terrain, which now only contained flowers partially, it had begun to mix into a more and more mountainous, rocky texture. His hungry crew stood behind him, many of them vexed. Nami inhaled, collecting herself as best as she could. If the Navy spots you, despite the deep breath, something snapped inside and she broke into a loud growl, shaking her captain by the shoulders, swinging his dangling head back and forth. It's going to take forever to get to the food cellar. Got it. If they spot us, we'll have to fight, hungry. All the way back to the Sunny, which hasn't even docked here yet. It can't. Because there's Marines as far as the eye can see. So keep a low profile. Get it? Luffy nodded gently. Still not convinced he got it. Zoro said. He was wincing at the sun, which was now shining brightly at them in the center of the clear sky. It was taking him back to how it had felt being lost in Alabaster. Luffy. Nami enunciated his name sternly. Repeat after me. If the Navy sees me, I have to wait longer to eat. The captain tried it out. It was hard. IBH, Nabui sees him. He got through half the sentence before he seemed to awaken from his low blood sugar coma. He jolted, horrified. I have to wait longer to eat. That's what we've been saying for a full minute. Get your head in the game. Sanji and Zoro shouted. Stay here for a second. Nami said, before army crawling her way up the hill carefully to inspect the scenery. She removed her backpack and pulled the map back out of it while keeping it on her side. After having oriented herself, she made up her mind. Rather than opt for taking the staircase in front of them, the majority of the Straw Hat crew made its way northwards as she'd commanded. As they neared the first row of houses via a more discreet country path, Robin muted the den mushes they had with them. If Frankie or Usopp call us, it won't give us away. The snails will vibrate in our bags. The architecture of the town they entered was quaint. Efficiently built, yet rustic enough that it could not be confused for anything of this age. Houses were pillared and balconied and lined with thick, rich wood. Regular wood. The oddities they had walked through the past several hours were nowhere to be seen. If it hadn't been for the Navy's presence, and the complete absence of anybody else, the crew would have felt they were on holiday. The gentle sound of waves was faint, but pervaded the air wherever you went. The Straw Hats treaded softly and quietly through the shady, derelict cobblestone streets. As Nami, at the front of the group, holding a map, approached the entrance to their destination, she stopped in her tracks. The rest followed suit, as they heard the same thing she did. So you think there's any sign of life left on this island? Asked a blue-white-clad man. Standard Navy uniform. Luckily him and his 3 colleagues had their backs turned. So they did not see the navigator peeking from a shadowed alley behind them. Nah, that distress call a few years back was the last thing we heard. If you ask me, everything sentient on this island's dead. This mission would be a waste of time if it wasn't for all the salvageable resources left here. Robin whispered, leave this to me, to her friends, who did just that. She crossed her arms, and grew several out atop a roof nearby them. There happened to be a pile of bricks atop it. All these were hidden from view of the Marines. She threw 2 bricks, with force. One followed by the other, straight through a glass window located in the opposite direction of the location of the Straw Hats. The moment the loud shattering noise had ended, there was a, what was that? Way to go, Robin. Nami smiled, no longer whispering, but still maintaining a quieter and softer than normal style of speech. This way, she said, as she folded the map back down and stuffed it in her pocket. They dashed across the street, opening the door of an empty tavern, and filing one by one into it. They shut themselves in, as the wooden sign with a painted cornucopia and a glass of beer dangled in the breeze. The starving Straw Hats found that the tavern was quite charming in spite of its dusty state of abandonment. They found it also to be void of food. That is, until they found the door to the cellar. This only occurred because an exhausted Nami had accidentally leaned onto an obscurely shaped lever, protruding from the brick wall near the old wooden bar. One which no one would have recognized as a lever, it having been shaped like an ornamental wall decoration. The room roared with the sound of a large wooden board opening. It took a moment before any one of the ravenous crew noticed where it was coming from. They filed into it, amidst dusty abandoned shelves filled with beer glasses. As they descended into the darkness, they were welcomed by a familiar scent which turned Luffy into a different person. He was making his way as fast as he could down the stairs, blindly. He sprinted messily through the pitch darkness, as if he had been reincarnated with all the youth of a spry child on coffee. Meat. Another matchstick was used by the Straw Hats to light a handy large old oil lamp. Although it had been covered in dusty grime, a wipey down of it restored its functionality. Sanji held it up, revealing the start of what was a long, diverse treasure trove of foods and beverages before them. An extensive row of stringed up, heavily salted and dried meats. Strips and whole legs of animal alike. Preserves of all sorts. Crewmates wiped dust off mason jars on the shelves to find items of all colors and textures, just waiting to be devoured, inside their unknowably old glass containers. Perfectly intact, albeit somewhat drier than previously, they were overwhelmed with relief by the jams, sauerkrauts and pickles of the forgotten, spacious room. Thank you, Nami. Chopper shrieked. Robin, Sanji, and Zoro smiled in agreement. I was starting to think we were goners there. Sanji murmured. Our navigator is so capable. Nami turned her back at him quite literally as he took on his infamously intensive fanboy alter ego. She was more interested in opening a nearby wooden chest. The thing was very elongated in shape, and closed with numerous clasps. Luffy grabbed a huge leg of what looked like a bovine's meat. Zoro wasted no time carving up large chunks of the dried meat and handing it out by hand to his crew. The chest Nami had been tinkering with was opened. The lid was heavy, but it was worth the exertion to lift the creaky old thing. Because inside this isolated old chest, floated a long, varnished wooden cylinder. It was attached to each respective side of the long boxy space. Around this cylinder was an impressively large amount of well-preserved crisp bread. This chest must be extremely well insulated, seeing as this food might be God knows how old, Robin said, after swallowing a chunk of cured meat. Luffy had already devoured roughly 5 large animals' worth of meats when Zoro's face lit up covetously. He was greedily pulling several wine bottles out of a rack to drink. Chopper copied him as he pulled a water bottle out of his own medicine bag. While I don't have much need for any of this, I am thoroughly relieved, and glad to see everyone happy. Brook added. He made himself useful by using another match to light several Mount oil lamps on the walls of the cellar as his fleshy friends recovered. Zoro took a big swig of the wine. He had downed several gulps of the deliciously aged fermented drink when he felt a pair of eyes on him. Enigmatic, slightly protruding and a bit hooded, she was standing next to Nami and Chopper by the stairs of the cellar. Resting her right elbow in her other hand at the height of her waist, the first few fingertips pressing, nay, caressing her own cheek. Coolly, calculatingly, she smiled a smile so subtle that only he would notice. She had been taking him in, starting with his sinewy, defined forearm. Her eyes moved along him to that stocky, useful hand wrapped around the bottle. She couldn't muster the mental energy or desire to fight the impulsive image that intruded her mind, of those hands wrapped around her own bare body in a similarly shaped manner. She could practically feel him grabbing her, see him unquestionably unclothed, squeezing her flesh hungrily, thrusting himself against her, as he. Robin snapped back to reality as Zoro stared back at her in a comically judgmental fashion. He was still drinking wine. Robin pretended slightly unconvincingly to switch her attention to eating some crisp bread with jam on it, turning her back to face further away from the subject of her fantasies. She listened for a second or two to Nami and Chopper. They were chatting between chewing of various food items. Chopper was explaining what the crew would do in case of food poisoning. It didn't take long for Zoro to help himself to another large chunk of cured ham, then move self-assertively back into her line of sight. Robin saw him in her peripheral vision and peeked back over at him. She found that he was leering at her, as he chewed proudly on the meat. All other crewmates were too preoccupied with the food, the drink, and planning the rest of the journey to notice. His vision traveled across her, imagining what it would be like to suckle on her soft neck, enjoying the way her shirt exposed her flawless collar, as well as a bit of what was beneath them. In refusal to be embarrassed, Robin ate her dry sandwich as sensually and comfortably as possible. Once she'd finished the crackling bread, she played innocent as she licked jam off her fingers. She locked eyes with him as she dipped her index in between her lips slowly, in. Further in. And then back out. She then turned her back to him completely. She was thankful no one could see her blushing. Nami and Chopper were opening more pickles and Sanji was writing down a list of ingredients so he could plan upcoming meals. Brook was rolling Luffy's bloated body back to the others and asking him why he keeps eating himself into this state. The agonizingly suggestive and slow way Robin had finished her bread had forced the swordsman to casually turn his body away from everyone in the room. Right hand on his hip, he wiped his face with the other. Zoro inhaled deeply, fighting tooth and nail to center himself using mindfulness meditation. He took a moment to shove any plans to exchange Robin's jam-covered fingers with parts of himself out of his mind. If anybody caught on to what was happening to him physically, the two of them would be done for. He thanked whatever gods, spirits and messiahs people believed in that he wasn't standing in the center of the room. Continuing to focus on his breathing and his surroundings. He tried to think. He couldn't show himself like this, but he couldn't afford to walk away from the crew again either. Unless. Remembered his luck as he modestly went up to Luffy and Brook. I saw a bathroom upstairs. I'm going up there. Sanji walked up with his own plastic travel cup filled with wine and told him, if you do that alone you'll end up on the other side of the planet. Take someone with you. Zoro pushed back against the bottom of his filthy leather shoe, which had planted itself against the side of his head. Shut the hell up, shit cook, it's just up the stairs to the right. I'll be back in no time. He started walking. Sanji continued frowning in annoyance, as he shouted, if he gets lost I will tell you all I told you so. And I ain't cleanin' that mess up myself. Robin decided against following the first mate up to the bathroom. Unfortunately, we've been acting suspiciously enough lately without another private rendezvous on our record, she thought to herself. She poured herself a small cup of wine and drank it in self-satisfaction. Although she continued to be plagued by the way his thick muscular neck had flexed, his glistening skin did not go away, his sharp jaw at an upward angle kept calling her, his mouth wrapped around the mouth of his wine bottle, the way his rhythmic gulping had bobbed his Adam's apple deliciously. Robin didn't know what was worse, getting in closer while things were this charged or keeping away from him and letting her imagination continue to run amok. She bit her lip in frustration. Where's my bathroom break? Zoro had returned, albeit with the guidance of Robin's envious clone hands. Zoro, we have a plan. Luffy sprinted past him up the stairs. Yay. He regained his balance after having been shoved by the sheer force of his captain's running. One by one, the Mugiwaras filed past him up the stairs. He startled as something had popped out of the wall of the stairway passage and grabbed his buttock. God damn it, woman, he hissed. Everyone was in too close of a proximity to him to have caught a glimpse of what happened. Chopper, who was the appropriate height to have spotted the action, was jauntily skipping at the start of the line, right after Luffy. What the hell are you talking about? Nami stared at him briefly as she walked by. Robin was last to pass him. He waited until she was in front of him and grabbed her behind in a discreet but strong-fisted fashion. He employed both his hands as she suppressed a startled shriek. Her face turned red again at what she had knowingly brought upon herself. He straightened out and kept walking normally. Why? Zoro searched for words to shout to Nami, who was pacing several steps in front of them, with her head turned towards the exit. You left me out of planning, he said without enough conviction. Not my fault you were in the bathroom for so long, the hell did you eat? And since when are you this into strategizing? I always took you for more of a, charge right into the fray, kind of guy. He gritted his teeth. Robin's sweet laugh echoed down the corridor. Just go with the flow, Zoro. Her perfume taunted him. The flow took the crew through the quaint walls of the town, and towards the docks, where a monumental navy ship loomed. Its shadow shielded them from the sun, along with the large army of men in uniform, the place was crawling with them. Most of them a similar stature and general appearance, they differed most of all in uniforms and weaponry. Most notable were the ones walking around in tall mechanical suits of armor, bordering on robots. Pristine white metal plating with rivets near each cyborg-like joint. There were men inside, but they were comfortably secured in a half-seated position in the torso of the things. The threat of the robotic armor was enhanced by what they were carrying. UWAH, flamethrowers. Luffy admired them too loudly. All Marines within a 20-meter radius turned toward the pirates, who were standing in a large cobblestone passage that led to the dock area. The nearby rundown market stalls would hardly work as cover, but they did add a certain decorative flavor to what was to come. Ha! Let's go get him! Luffy shouted. Zoro's eye gleamed with bloodlust, as he popped a sword in his mouth, tying his bandana onto his head. He drew his other two swords. Roger that! He roared. Sanji had already coolly leapt into battle after his captain. Nami was accompanied by Chopper. They had long before the attack headed west, snail phone and map in tow. The two remaining Straw Hat pirates on the island were stationed in the bell tower of a large nearby church. Brook hid himself behind a pillar as Robin surveyed the area for tactical strengths and weaknesses. Okay, said the skeleton, once I leave my body I will become a lifeless skeleton. Please take care of me until I come back, Robin-san. Leave it to me. She nodded at him with confidence, crossing her arms across her chest. With a mysterious and paranormal noise, Brook began his separation, as his spirit soared out of his mouth, into the subtly salty seaside air. The sensation of flight over the large market square, and the aerial view of his three fellow men below fended off huge waves of Marines and officers was enough to make him chuckle with glee. Yo-ha-ho-ha-ho-ha-ho-ha-ho-ho, Brook soared through the plated hull of the Navy ship. A hallway, hooah. It was empty, save for one bored-whistling janitor. He worked, his mop tracing circles over the floor, ignorant of what was happening just outside. The Jolly Ghost continued his journey. The next room was a large dining hall, filled with round tables covered with white plain cloth. Similarly, functionality first, chairs, and a buffet table with a lot of empty metal meal warmers and trays. That's boring, Brook said to the empty enclosure. He found himself in a clean but drab bathroom after some more flight. Next, the misty ghost hit the jackpot next. Which is precisely why he adopted a low profile. Brook was now in a decadently decorated conference room. Luckily, the two naval officers were invested in their discussion and had not seen him. Back atop the church, Robin had been looking long enough at Brook's empty husk that she was getting bored. She turned her body to face her three male crewmates fending off Marines and sent a massive gigantesco mono stomp down to aid them. This alerted some of the Marines as to her whereabouts, which sent them running towards her. Sanji was first to notice. Robin Kwan, he cried. The chef focused his attention on the Marines who began to change attack direction. UBASTARDSSSSSSSSSS. He took a massive swing at several of their necks at once. Collier shoot. Zoro had glanced over to get a read of the situation. He breathed a somewhat disgruntled sigh of relief, then snapped back mentally into his own fight as he deflected the blow of a machine-like enemy, which had tried to swing a flamethrower at him in the style of a blunt weapon instead of blowing more flames he could dodge. Frankie docked the ship discreetly near a fishing dock as Usopp helped secure a ramp from the island to the ship into place. We don't have time to lose, Nami told him. He nodded once, as he ran back onto the ship. In roughly a minute, he had returned in a custom-made truck. It had Frankie's signature design elements all over it, including a face that resembled the head of the Sunny, minus the sun-like mane. The vehicle sported a sizable trunk, into which Nami and Chopper jumped. They sped off into town. Luffy had just balloon breathed 24 naval officers into the sea when Zoro slashed 10 rows of men to the point of disability. Gotta say, I've missed solid opponents, he said, taking a powerful giant lunge at them. Sanji was spin-kicking Marine after Marine into the air. The gigantic quantity of enemies was dwindling, several of the countless flame-throwing metal-suited men had even been brought down, when Robin, who was still next to Brook at the viewpoint that was the church bell tower, caught onto something that shrank her pupils in a panic. An impending, massive wave of the amalgam bug beings. Usopp. Step on it. Of course step on it. I was famous in Syrup Village, as the, Amazing Express, demon driver. He pressed the pedal harder as he spun the wheel for a hard turn. Nami held onto Chopper, who was being held securely in her arms as she sat to the right of the now aggressive driver. That's when her transponder snail began making noise in her backpack. She carefully let go of Chopper with her right arm and reached for the bag, giving it to the small reindeer. Hello, Chopper said, as he picked up the snail. It was Robin. Chopper. Frankie. There's a whole slew of bug monsters headed through town. You need to be on guard. Frankie undocked the Sunny as swiftly as he could. Nami, Chopper and Usopp pushed the cellar doors closed. Nami figured out how to lock it securely as Usopp held an oil lamp up for her. So, the gigantic naval commodore was smoking a fat cigar. At least, Brook assumed he was a commodore, based on the look of his outfit. His similarly wide index finger was decorated with a gold ring which gleamed as he tapped it against the ashtray in front of him. A little birdie tells me we've got ourselves some pirate interference. The static eyes of his dark bearded face were somewhat haunting. Brook was impressed that he himself, a ghost, should be the one to feel this. He also pondered briefly whether the man's aura was due to a worldly wisdom, or an emotional detachment from the world. A different voice spoke. Yes, most inconvenient. Brook's spirit poked its eyes very slowly and subtly out from inside an ornate cabinet near the two men, then hid back inside of it. The other man was light-haired, muscular in a more slender way. He seemed slightly lower in rank. The Admiral's orders were clear. We were to wipe the bugs out and do a sweep of the island for resources. We have it on good authority that the mineral deposits in the dry zones of the island Ipo are worth millions. Now that our insects have cleared out the copious fallout of the recent war, it should all be ours for the taking. The light-haired man said. Brook recognized the familiar noise of a nearby transponder snail ringing. The slimmer man walked over to pick up. Captain Meiji here, this had better be important. I'm in the middle of AM, Captain, sir. We have masses of bugs coming in at 12 o'clock, I need orders. The snail hollered. Hold on 1 second, Lieutenant. Meiji said, managing to maintain a calm demeanor despite the bead of sweat forming on his temple. He looked at his superior as he planted the snail against his chest briefly. The Commodore took a deep puff of his cigar. It's time you took the reins, Meiji-san. Show me what you can do. I leave this entirely in your hands. Zoro's pupils were the size of a pinprick as he looked upon the legion of bug monsters which were approaching. His swords were in his hands and mouth, and yet he felt Robin's heavy torso in excruciating detail, wilting in his arms again. His chest pounded deafeningly as he in a state of disorientation sheathed his blades and yanked the flamethrower off the limp framework of his recently slain metal-suited foe. The swordsman sprinted toward the church tower, followed by Sanji. Zoro took a deep breath in, halted as he looked up through a gap in the second floor, up to the bell tower above it. Then he screamed at the top of his lungs. Robin! She saw the object of her affection as she glanced down between the scaffolding. She'd already stolen her own flamethrower off a marine and passed it up the church walls to herself. There's way too much wood up there. Get down here, the swordsman demanded. What about Brook? She shouted back. He's a skeleton, bugs aren't a threat to him. Sanji chipped in. The archaeologist thought about it for a brief second. Ran down the stairs to meet the men below. She looked sternly at them as she said, I promised I'd look after his remains until he's back. We can't let any Marines get their hands on him. The men nodded in unison. Zoro placed his flamethrower on the ground temporarily. Help me shut this. He ran for the large, open church entrance, and his two crewmates followed him across the marble floor. One man pushed each respective door of the giant entrance as Robin grew a massive pair of arms to help them both push. The three pirates caught a glimpse of the bug beasts as the doors closed. Zoro immediately slashed one column on each side of the entrance down. The momentum of his cut had the pieces of infrastructure fall directly so that they held the doors shut. He picked his flamethrower back up. Looked up at the bugs coming in from above. I have an idea, Robin said. The bug monsters were shaped like several different animals, including a few bipeds that looked like humans. As their hideous swarm-like bodies began pouring through the openings in the structure of the bell tower above them, the pirates held their position in the chapel aisle behind numerous rows of medieval-styled wooden seats. They had been repositioned to create a large barricade around the group. Rows upon rows of the benches played separator to the incoming enemies for the three humans. Zoro, Sanji, and Robin repressed their discomfort at the way bugs were traveling across and even through Brook's empty husk. They continued to contain their disgust even as the bugs made their way disturbingly closer. And closer yet. As the swarms shaped themselves back into animal mimics, and got so far as having climbed over a few of the first rows of seat barricade, an opportune moment arrived. Robin gave the signal. Now. The noise of gas tanks emptying filled the room, as flames were thrown at the numerous wooden church benches around the pirates. They caught fire fairly easily, much to the chagrin of the bug beings. Several dozens of them were caught in the inferno surrounding their intended prey, as they were scorched into ash and nothingness. Screams echoed throughout the room, coming from faux vocal cords. Sanji turned pale as a sheet of paper. That sounds like a woman's scream. Zoro interrupted. The blade-deprived swordsman's tone of voice was more stoic than Sanji's, but he couldn't help the tension in his neck and jaw. He kept his position as close to Robin as possible without risking his clothes catching fire the next time she used her weapon. The agonized screeching subsided as the crewmates waited a while longer. Robin grew a hand with an eye in it out of a column near Brook's body. It vanished into floating petals quickly thereafter. The coast is clear, strangely enough. That is strange, there looked to be at least 100 of them earlier. Sanji replied. We can't afford to let our guards down, not even a little bit. Chopper's cooped up in the pantry, or he's already back on the sunny. Who knows how quick that bug poison works. Right as they began pondering their next move, the trio startled at the sound of rattling bones. Brook! Robin shouted. The skeleton dusted off his outfit after having risen to his feet. Boy, have I got a tale to tell. He shouted back. Began descending the stairs. I couldn't stay nearby you, but it seems like you're intact and haven't been hurt. Robin said, as she smiled gently. What the heck happened here? The tall bone man asked, pushing the ash on the floor with his shoe in an almost childlike gesture. He was now on the same floor of the building as them, which is why it once again dawned on Sanji and Zoro that he was in fact, an extremely tall undead being. Maybe we should start by getting back on the sunny before we launch into storytelling. I dunno about you guys, but I am pretty damn sick of waiting around to be attacked by more of these shitty bugs. Besides, it's getting dark out. Sanji said. Agreed. Zoro and Robin responded in unison. Luffy was sitting on the head of the Going Sunny, after having flung himself all the way from the middle of the town over to the ship. He had narrowly escaped the threat of landing in the sea. He was now staring off into the horizon vacantly, looking at the sunset. Captain. Oh. Frankie. I saw Usopp, Nami and Chopper bringing in piles of food on board and I got here as fast as I could. He smiled his gigantic toothy, uninhibited smile. Where are they now? They're guarding the fridge. I would ask from what, but I think we both know why you're sitting out here. Luffy turned his blank expression back to the horizon. Frankie felt a tap on his shoulder. A disembodied hand was growing out of his shoulder. He looked at it, as it pointed in a downward direction toward the island shore. Frankie, drop the ladder. Sanji shouted. He stood next to the remainder of the stranded Straw Hats. 3 of them were still carrying a flamethrower each. The 2 men and 1 undead man let Robin climb aboard first. The wooden exterior of the ship was swaying with the waves at a slight distance from the shore. She leapt to catch the ladder steps, channeling the impact of the jump into her feet and hands right before she began her ascent. Once Robin was on board, she used her ability to receive all the flamethrowers and carefully lift them onto the ship. Zoro bared his teeth as Sanji pushed in front of him to climb after her. He went up next and was followed by their skeleton companion as the ship was steered away from the island. The crew opted instead to drop the ship's anchor at a safe distance from the threat of bugs and marines. Not very long after this, the resident chef had prepared a marvelous feast from the large mass of modest range of long-lived foods they had found. The dining table was decorated with bowls of various pickle salads, appetizers swirled with sauces, and main courses dotted with pastes he had concocted masterfully. Sanji had even conjured up a cheesecake made from a tub of cream cheese that he had dug out of the back of the Sunny's freezer. He had combined it to delicious effect with the ground crisp bread and jam from the pub cellar. A crackly caramel layer separated the crumbly bottom of the cake, spiced with cinnamon from the mouthwateringly fatty, smooth layer of thickened cream cheese, which was topped with raspberry jam. This is amazing, Chopper screamed, piling more food onto his plate before he had even finished all of his current helping. The pirates were too tired from the events of the day, and too hungry, to say much. They simply ate in silence for a few minutes. It's impressive how creative all of this is. Robin broke the silence, smiling subtly as she ate another bite gracefully with her fork. Before Sanji could explode into a dramatic gesture of gratitude to the woman, Brooke interjected. It's time I shared what I managed to find out on the ship. You see, I ended up listening in on a fairly important meeting aboard that thing. The captain received a call from the guys fighting you by the market. He told the men to withdraw back on board once the bugs showed up. So that's why they never came for us in the church. Zoro murmured, though the last few chews of a piece of a pickle. Yes, Brooke continued. But there is more, they've apparently got another mission on this island. They plan to retrieve a lavish treasure that is said to be tucked away inside the depths of a local library once they have regrouped. They'll move out precisely at noon and make a beeline for the library. Nami's eyes lit up and her attention had gotten exponentially better the moment Brooke had said the word, treasure. Their ship is still not super far away from us. I'd suggest attacking it with our cannons or something, but the hull looks to be made of really thick steel. There's not a chance in hell we can put a dent in something so huge and solid. Frankie said. At any rate, we can't afford to attack them tonight. We're all too exhausted, meaning we'd be vulnerable. Sanji added. We need to stay on guard while we sleep tonight though. The ship's got great security systems, but I'd be more comfortable if we had a person each on deck throughout 2 respective halves of the night. That way you're both more or less alert, and you won't be too sleep-deprived to venture out tomorrow. Frankie said. I can keep a lookout for the first half of the night. Chopper exclaimed. I've barely been useful today, and I'd like to feel like I've done something. Great. Frankie poured himself a small glass of Ipo Island liquor. Zoro caught the cyborg's attention before he had time to put the bottle back down. He did a brief beckoning gesture with all fingers on his right hand, and then very clearly and proudly pointed at himself. He was leaning so far across the edge of the table he looked like he was going to commando crawl over it. Gee, what could this guy want? I wonder. Anybody else wanna volunteer for the night watch? Frankie sent the bottle to the excited swordsman. Brooke held his own glass up in the air. I'll help. I usually get up as early as 5 anyway. Lowered it to his face and sipped it. Anyway, I'm already resting. For all eternity. You ho 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 ho. We still need to figure out when and how to intercept the Navy. Nami said. She pulled out the map she'd been given by Sanji and Zoro and began inspecting the small illustration of the building and its surrounding area. As they planned their assault on the Navy, and their route to the building in the morning, the Straw Hats gradually relaxed. So much that it began to feel like an ordinary dinner once again. After dinner, Robin waited a while, pretending to be going to the library as usual. She then made her way up to the crow's nest. Zoro pocketed the note she had snuck into his hand after dinner with a bemused smirk, as he followed suit. As the swordsman climbed up into his very familiar gym area, his excitement grew as he saw her. He could not keep from smiling as he laid eyes on those long skirt-covered legs draped across the long sofa as she reclined, staring at him. The seat decorated the room's circular shape in a semicircle as usual. Her erotic gesture was much less usual. Her top was boasting, revealing, and calling attention to some of her remarkable assets. Long, raven curls dancing down her shoulders next to them like the waves of the ocean surrounding them would at midnight. Robin's sultry expression was reaching into his body and soul, triggering an indescribable explosion of euphoria, warmth, adrenaline, and numerous other sensations. Zoro's skin reddened as he walked toward her. As he aimed to sit down next to her, Robin went from her reclining, incendiary pose into a more subtle, politely seated one. He lowered himself onto the couch at a respectful distance, but she wasn't having it. The archaeologist made sure that she settled into a sitting position so close to him that their knees were a few hairs away from touching. She blushed with fervor and gasped in surprise at his change of heart as he put his hand behind her neck, steadying and tilting her head as he planted his mouth snugly against hers. He had made his move so fast that she hadn't had time to pick her jaw back up off the floor. Zoro took advantage of the fact, by tentatively working his tongue in. Robin moaned gently in approval, playing slowly with the sensation of texture of her own tongue pushing back against his, as she brushed her lips closed against his, then relaxed her jaw again, dipping back into his face. The swordsman's tongue eased its way out of her mouth, as he planted a smaller kiss on her cheek firmly and politely. A chill ran down his spine at Robin, wasting no time to undress him. She had begun by gently tugging his robe off by the shoulders. He gulped as his chest heaved. It glistened with sweat after a long day of strenuous physical activity. The material fell to the cushions surrounding him, somewhat like it would in a particularly demanding battle. The odd thing was how different this felt. He wasn't the one who had placed himself on display. She placed her warm hand against his burning pectoral muscle, her other one was about to stroke its way down his ribcage when he caught it in his grip. He took her other wrist with his free hand. She stopped what she was doing instantly, as he gently let go. Zoro. She looked for some sort of figurative green light in his expression, one which was surprisingly and increasingly distant. Are you okay? She asked, softer than she meant to. He furrowed his brow and pulled the upper half of his yukata back on. This isn't your fault, he said, unable to look at her. Do you not want to? Before she could finish her question, he interrupted her. You know I do. Is there anything I can do? I gotta go. He got up and left, glanced back over his shoulder once, very briefly. Wondering how he could ever face her again. Robin had her hand where he had just sat. Her heart sank as the patch of fabric cooled down. Robin was in her nightgown, she had just finished brushing her teeth. She took the towel off her long hair and brushed it in the mirror of the dressing table in her and Nami's room. The navigator was changing into pajamas when she asked the archaeologist, so, how's the situation? Robin began beaming at the exciting prospect of retelling what had happened since the two last spoke. She then sighed slightly, remembering the events from a few hours ago. That good. I'm gonna kill him. Don't kill him. Robin chuckled, as she started removing what was left of her makeup using a cotton pad. Yet, she added, Nami lowered herself onto her soft bed with a tired sound of comfort upon contact with the clean sheets. Robin decided she ought to elaborate. Let me start by saying he apologized for yelling at me in the bunker. Good. You two had us really frickin' worried back there. I heard some of it through the door, it seemed really serious. We had a close call. I don't know if Chopper and Sanji told you, one of those bugs poisoned me. To think a tiny thing like that can wreak such havoc. Robin, are you feeling okay now? Nami raised torso off the bed in concern, looking at her. Yes. The doctor fixed me up, I'm good as new. I can't say the same of Zoro's ego though. He blames himself. Nami contemplated this for a moment. She stared at her own hands in thought, they were resting on the sheets. He also, Robin blushed, wondering how much she ought to disclose to Nami about the man who was apparently her beau. The smile wasn't leaving her face, still she decided to get up and walk to her bed, exposing the expression. He admitted he's become taken with me. She settled for, taken with, knowing how much of an aversion to being seen as soft in public he had. Nami beamed back at her, overjoyed as she scrunched her face up playfully. Oh my god, I'm trying to picture it, he probably looked so funny while saying it. She jumped up onto her palms and knees on her mattress. There's no way he said the phrase, taken with. Nami bounced out of her bed over to Robin's. She shook her roommate by the shoulder back and forth. What did he say? Robin. Did he say he loves you? Oh my god. He gave you a love confession. Whoa whoa whoa, no way. Robin was laughing. The jig was up. Something along those lines. What the heck? Nami stared at her excitedly, her mouth hung open. What did you reply? She asked. I said I feel the same. Robin managed to keep her mature composure despite the infectious levels of hype Nami was emanating. She hugged Robin in a move so aggressive it swung her off balance. It took some effort not to fall off her bed onto the floor. I'm so happy for you. You seem so happy. Nami's eyes were watering up. Robin was gently holding Nami's shoulder after having swept some of her ginger hair away. Her chin leaned on the back of her neck as she inhaled the sweet scent of a perfume with prominent notes of tangerine. I am so happy. I have been, ever since I became part of the crew. Are you going to tell the others? It seems a little premature. To be honest with you, I don't know yet how well this is going to work. I figure it's better not to stir up drama before Zoro, and I know we can keep this going in a way that's healthy and functional. What are you worried about most? Nami asked. Well, Robin pondered for a few seconds. A few things. Nami leaned back out of the embrace, feeling Robin's soft hand slide naturally off her back. The navigator sat down properly, cross-legged next to her tall, polite body. Robin searched her mind, thinking about the way Zoro had left her in the crow's nest, and the way he'd almost died to the thing attacking them as she sat helpless in the glass tube. She remembered how he'd ended up completely shredded with wounds of every sort at Thriller Bark, disabled for weeks, covered with scars from Kuma. He's so ready to die for me. So willing to die for any one of us. Nami raised the innermost edges of her eyebrows in concern. Robin continued, I know he's a warrior, and I know how much incredible willpower and loyalty he has in him. It's admirable. I would do the same for any one of you, and for him. But he shoulders so much. He should know he doesn't have to. I understand why that's extra difficult for you. What with your friend on Ohara? Nami replied softly. He's also so closed off with his feelings. There is only so much guessing I can do about why. If he stays that way, and if I stay similarly private with my emotions, this relationship won't last long. He's not a man of many words. That's just Zoro for you. Nami agreed. He doesn't need to be. I like a good comfortable silence. I mean, I live most of my life in the library. I just wish I knew what he was going through. Sometimes I might be able to help, other times it'd just be nice not to be kept in the dark. Nami was laying back on her own bed, on her stomach. She fiddled with the corner of her pillow for a bit, then sleepily said, well, maybe don't focus too much on the what-ifs and the anxieties. Enjoy what's been working for you. I think it's cool that you two are in cahoots after knowing each other for so long. It means you're actually falling in love with each other, not some sort of mirage or assumption. Not that I know that much about this subject. She yawned. Robin turned the lights off, and said, you're right, but I can't say I know much about it either. So we're probably just out here guessing. The two women pulled their covers over themselves. Good night, Robin, said Nami. Good night, Nami, said Robin. Zoro was short. He couldn't possibly be more than 3'5". Looking down at his body, he noticed how tattered and dirty his clothing was. His tiny hands were caked with a layer of dust from whatever it was he had been doing before. He stuck to the outer edge of the bustling village street where he found himself. All manner of carts, people, horses. The place felt weirdly familiar. He hadn't been there in a long, long time. He was making the most intimidating face he could come up with. He kicked a pebble straight ahead as he walked on. People would glance at him occasionally. Some indifferently, others looked away in a panic. A hint of what he would come to recognize as pure sadness on their faces. What are you staring at? Move along, he shouted. Why was his voice so high-pitched and small? He heard the womanly screech of agony from the church again. Clear as a hideous day, it had jolted him straight out of bed onto the deck with his triple sword cases in hand. He looked all around, only to see nothing. Almost instantly upon having scanned the ship's deck, he sprinted on toward Nami and Robin's room. Robin, Nami, you heard that noise right? Is everything good in here? No answer. He felt sickly, as his heart shot up into his throat. Zoro shouted from out of the hall through their door, before pushing the handle down and opening the room door. I'm coming in. He saw now that the women were sleeping peacefully in their beds among their decorative souvenirs, their vanity equipment. Robin's classical artwork hung unassumingly on the wall in the night air. Just as it always did. He couldn't help noticing for the shortest of moments that yes, Nami was indeed quite pretty in such a relaxed and unthreatening state. On the other hand, Robin made her meticulous hanging still life oil paintings look like worthless gutter trash. The moonlight which fell through a nearby window brought out the planes of her face in a mesmerizing pale blue. Her hair was taking on a more vivid blue shine. Locks of hair ran down the contours of her shoulders and collar like an elegant river stream in a mountainside. He couldn't allow himself to get too enthralled by that, or in how clean, well cared for and soft her skin looked. The sensual, pink fullness of her lips had to also be repressed into a corner of his mind, too. He needed to stay alert. As he closed the door to the girl's room behind him, the cacophonous noise went off again. Zoro scanned the ship's hull, ran again as fast as he could, got back on deck. Nothing. The ship's masts. There was nothing suspect about them either. Nothing on the sides of the ship. He decided to make his way back to the shore of the island. That was where he found her. The night air felt both claustrophobic and agoraphobic simultaneously inexplicably. The silence was now deafening. A disheveled black bobcut. She wore plain, gender-neutral clothing. This child was sitting on a piece of rocky terrain which separated the start of the cliffs surrounding the nearby village. In front of her was the beach sand, at which she was picking with her wooden practice sword. How the hell is this possible? The swordsman thought. She looked way too much like. There's no way. What the hell are you doing here? He shouted. The child didn't seem to notice. He knew it was her. It didn't look like anybody else in the universe. Oi, I'm talking to you. His second attempt fell flat as well. He felt an engrossing shock. Every muscle in his body tensed, as he produced a noise that was a sort of marriage of a retch and a gasp. There was definitely a katana going through his midsection, the pain seared him to his core, right before he felt completely numb. As he endured the unfortunately well-known sensation of a blade carving its way through his muscles. He felt like the raw chicken breast he'd watched Sanji slice through a few weeks ago. Zoro just barely managed to hold himself up by his legs until the sharpened blade had exited his flesh again, leaving him to tumble onto the sand. His breathing weighed several tons, as he looked up at who it was had been standing on his side. That swordswoman from Logatown and Punk Hazard, leave her alone. She commanded, as angry at him as usual. What in hell is going on? He managed to hiss. That's when he woke up again. This time he knew he was no longer dreaming. The Straw Hats walked quietly through the coastal town, but all they could hear was wind, and the occasional sign swaying in the wind, rusty metal chains moaning in the breeze ominously. Nami recalled the silence of Kokoyashi, her home village, on days when Arlong's men would patrol the streets and harass the inhabitants for any money they had scraped together through blood, sweat and tears. It was the type of silence she knew all too well. One which was neither peaceful nor soothing. It's that street over there. She pointed to it, several crosswalks away. As the entirety of the Straw Hat pirates stared up at the massive landmark, they started to understand why it might be of interest to the Navy. The towering cylindrical exterior was tall enough to reach the clouds. The recent church's height paled in comparison to this. A landmark which boasted heaps of materials imported from overseas and had clearly been constructed by outstanding architects. The structure's design was impeccably sturdy looking, with marble walls. Inside the concave squares decorating the exterior of the first few floors were countless mosaic artworks and engravings. What a cultural heritage site this seems to be, Robin said, marveling at the beauty of it. I can't wait to see what's inside. It took Zoro a few seconds to notice he was gently smiling with her even though he was several meters away from her. Nami's eyes widened. I wondered what this thing was when we were staring down at the town. Library wasn't my first guess, but it's definitely amazing. Luffy yanked at the hefty mechanism which was blocking the sizable doors of the library with all his power. He did so only to lose his balance and fall backwards onto the ground as the mega-sized doors opened with ease. Well, that was unexpected, Usopp admitted, looking with frantic curiosity at the contraptions on each of the two door parts, which now stood wide open. These things are really thick. He was trying to wrap his head around how the mechanism for opening them could possibly work, but everyone had already entered the colossal library and several of his friends had already called his name. Yeah, all right. Hold our horses. He ran after his friends, realizing he did not love the idea of meeting more of the awful bug creatures, or marines on his own. The Straw Hats stood together in the main entrance of one of the most incredible structures they had ever seen. The stories of the building were too numerous to count, and to everyone's surprise they went both ways. Robin began to speak, but before she could finish her sentence, Zoro took care of it for her. There's basement levels. The circumference of the place was the size of a stadium, in which archways decorated the center of each story, protecting visitors from falling into the long chasm in the building's center. Curved staircases made of marbled stone connected every floor of the place, and there appeared to be an archaic elevator running on two opposite sides of it. The floors of the story they stood on were checkered with intricate patterns. Each story of the library was outlined with grand, connecting shelves. The shelves were made of aged, albeit finely lacquered, high-quality wood. The shelves nearest the library entrance seemed to have seen better days, as a significant amount of books were damaged or missing. Looters appeared to have lost their resolve a few hundred meters into the place, luckily. This was evident by the fact that nearly every square inch of the walls of the architectural wonder was covered in every color, size, and thickness of book one could imagine. Columns stemmed from the solid stone balcony-like fences tracing the edge of the dangerous chasm of the building. These columns surrounded most of the visible library stories, connecting each level of the tower chasm in a sacred and dizzyingly endless visual rhythm. The tops of the columns were decorated by arches, offering architectural support for every floor above it while also looking fairly stylish. The columns were only interrupted by walls in select parts of the gargantuan cylindrical library, where there appeared to be closed rooms invisible to persons standing in the rest of the structure. The Straw Hats did not say anything for several minutes, for the gravity of what they had stepped into was far beyond what any of them had been able to imagine beforehand. Most of the crewmates were yet again too distracted to notice the way the swordsman was staring at the archaeologist. He was lost in the bliss of a second-hand happiness. Thankfully he had yet to get physically lost, though there was still plenty of time left for him to make up for this. Robin looked back at him knowingly, then looked back at the ocean of books surrounding them. She tried to process the fact that she may be in a heaven so personally tailored, one which filled every corner of her heart with light, excitement and warmth. Nami cried out in glee. Robin, you're gonna need to make some room on our shelves. The navigator was walking along, glancing at book titles etched in leather. She turned around to look at her friend. Is she, crying? She asked softly, as she looked for confirmation from Zoro. There would be something wrong with her if she wasn't in this situation. He chuckled. Zoro was fighting with everything inside of him not to wrap his arms around Robin. Said arms were crossed in front of his chest, hands pressing into his own skin in an attempt to get rid of excess energy. He looked around, even a man accused of being a gym rat like himself could see it was impressive. Frankie looked up into the top of the structure, which was surprisingly visible due to would-be walls surrounding the circular abyss being mostly rows of arched columns. Hey Brooke, I think I found some friends of yours, man. His giant mechanical hand pointed to the top of the building. Brooke couldn't see what he was talking about and pulled a spyglass from out of the backpack Frankie was wearing. Bats. Ha. So that's what that distant chirping is. Chopper said. The skeleton looked a few stories lower and added, looks like there's some birds that have made a home in here too, but where in the name of all that is unholy are these critters coming in from? Who knows? Hope they haven't damaged the books though. There could be useful medical texts abound in here. Chopper said. A very smiley Robin was walking along the west side of the building, tears still streaming down her face beneath her sparkling eyes. She wiped them on her forearm and fought to collect herself. We might want to split up again, it'll help us find some way to navigate this place. There must be a map, or index of what categories are on which floor. She stared again in disbelief at the dream surrounding her. Somewhere around here. Luffy had already run ahead of Nami, onto the east wing of the library. He was catapulting himself up a flight of stairs, and he hit a shelf-covered wall loudly as his flight was violently halted by the building. The red-headed woman was naturally alarmed by this. Luffy, you're going to wreck the structure's support, and if that happens we are all toast. You know, I would rather be with you guys when that happens. Usopp's face was one of resignation. He trailed after Robin and Zoro. Sanji was behind them, and he was looking from one female crew member on each respective side of the library to the other. His whole body turned left, toward Robin, and then right, toward Nami. He was pivoting on one foot in a sort of crouch, arms pointed in desperate longing at one woman, then the other. What doido fudoido, he muttered. Robin Kwan needs my emotional support, left turn. But Nami Swan needs help making sure our idiot captain doesn't kill himself and everyone else. He leaned sideways against a shelf while inhaling 2 lungs full of cigarette smoke. He cradled the upper part of his face in his hand, contemplatively. He could feel the ticking of a clock he was not wearing, each tuck and tick a slap to each side of his face. Won the hand of a disgraced Robin. Tick, how could you leave me, Sanji? It seemed to say. Talk, Sanji-kun. Why would you strand me so irresponsibly? I thought you were my knight in shining armor. Said the other one. Tick, I know Nami-san. Ah, I should have known a day like this would come. Sanji said aloud, his eyes watering. Talk, the ordeal of love, he whispered. Sanji felt a large metallic pair of hands grab the belt and ass area of his pants, along with the collar back of his coat. You're annoying the living hell out of me, so I'm deciding for ya. Frankie was being a good friend by throwing him towards the stairs Nami and Luffy had climbed. You're going west and I won't hear another word about it. Sanji flew, disgraced through the air like a recently scruffed cat. He also managed to land on all fours like one, albeit more clumsily than a cat would. This had saved his designer suit from several scrape holes. He stood back up on two legs and dusted himself off. Fine. But not because you said so. I'm going because I love Nami Swan. He yelled at the cyborg, who was walking further and further out of a range where he could hear the chef. You almost ruined my suit, Frankie. Asshole. He added, for good measure. Although he felt relief. The curse was lifted. He had been absolved of guilt. Brook had already headed east. Chopper ran to catch up with Sanji and Nami. He had felt conflicted too, until he remembered he had given Venom antidote to Usopp, and felt more at ease with his decision to go east. Frankie spoke to his newly established team. I can understand that this is really exciting for you, Robin, but let's not lose sight of what we're here to do. We came here early to scout the place and find a way to ambush the Navy first and foremost. I hope the rest of you are listening too. If you run into any trouble, the trackers and phones should still work in here. There are few separated areas on each floor, and we'll have fewer flights of stairs to climb and descend if we explore the building by floors rather than trying to divide each story into a west and east wing. Robin said, that's a good point. I'll call Nami up and tell her we're going downstairs. Right as Frankie made to lift the transponder snail to his face, Zoro stopped him. Oi Frankie, hold up. The cyborg looked at the swordsman. What's the matter? We should be the ones to go upstairs. Am I allowed to ask why? Zoro made an avoidant face of discomfort, reminiscent of a middle school boy who had just been asked if he has a crush on somebody. Okay, Frankie gave up on waiting for him to open up about it. I suppose I don't care which way we go, and I trust your judgment. Even if this air of mystery is confusing to me. Zoro spoke up, feeling his face heat up in embarrassment. I'm just sick of basements. Robin and I spent a whole day in one recently. It's not that deep. I dunno, I mean. Basements are pretty deep. YOHOHOHOHOHOHOHOHOHOHOHOHO. Brook held up an index finger to his hysterical laughing face. Zoro was the least amused by this. Robin knew Zoro had been lying about the last bit. Whether it was intentional lying or not was a different question. She also knew he abhorred admitting he could get scared, which was why she kept her lips sealed. Any other requests before I call Nami? Frankie asked. No. He looked at his teammates. Good. The upstairs exploring party had covered half of the first floor they were on, when Robin noticed a large and dusty metallic plate which was not far from the elevator. This rectangular object appeared to be a sign of some sort. She procured her towel from her backpack and began wiping it skillfully. Her hunch had been correct, there were indeed embossed letters behind the thick layer of grime. Gentlemen, have a look at this. She called out. Hey, you found a floor plan. Usopp smiled as he inspected the text. Nice one, Robin. Frankie said. Where do you suppose we should go? Zoro asked. There's so much here. All of, Robin pointed at the top of the building plan. 100 stories. Both ways. That's 200 total. She sounded like a child in a candy shop. The enthusiasm was infecting her friends. Celestial Collection sounds fancy. The floor at the top of the building. Usopp said. Supposing this elevator still works, maybe we could go all the way up there and make our way back down. Robin replied. I just remembered something. I don't think I mentioned it yesterday. Brook cried out. Everyone looked over at the skeleton. Those Navy big shots mentioned something about the Celestial Collection in their meeting. It's ringing a bell, I couldn't remember the name of it right off the top of my head when I was relaying what they said. Do you remember what they said about it? Robin asked. Yeah, they said that's where important information about the island and the world is located. Something about an intellectual cornucopia. Whatever the heck that means. You didn't think to mention this during dinner. Everyone but Robin cried out at Brook. Hey, you try and retell half an hour's worth of conversation off by heart. I'm doing my best here, all right. Maybe we should start on the top floor and advance down the stairs. We need to stay focused, because the Navy will be here in just a few hours. Robin said. Robin's right. We need a good game plan for when they arrive. We should convene with the others in about an hour. Start figuring out how we're going to fight them without destroying any of these texts. Zoro said. I'd offer to test this elevator for you guys, seeing as how I can fly and have an inbuilt laser in case I get stuck in there. Unfortunately, I am too big to fit inside of it. Frankie was indeed a few heads taller and many heads broader than the elevator would allow. Brooke, you're also definitely too tall for the job. Frankie added, as he looked at the skeleton. How old is that thing anyway? Wait, don't tell me, I don't wanna know. Usopp said, judging by the architecture of this place, as well as the font used in this metal plate. We're looking at a building that is at least 200 years old. Maybe 300, said Robin. She heard no response to the information and decided to keep talking as she looked at the elevator. The metal might be very rusted, it could be brittle. So if we're not careful we could plummet to our death for roughly 100 floors below this story. She looked around the area to find no sign of Usopp or Zoro. Brooke and Frankie grew confused at their absence as well. After a few seconds, the swordsman's green head of hair reappeared in the gap in the floor above the stairs leading to the floor below the one they were on. He was dragging Usopp back up the stairs by his overalls. If you're too chicken to get in the elevator, I'll do it. Just quit running off on your own, ya idiot. He let go of Usopp once he got the sniper back to the others. Robin giggled at the situation, which was brotherly beneath the physicality of the horseplay. Where do you get off, lady? Usopp directed a comically unforgiving expression at her. Zoro, if you test the elevator I'll be able to use my ability to keep you from falling down the chasm. Robin looked at him as she reassured him. He walked up to the folding door of patterned metal, which separated the elevator itself and the library floor they were on. It was putting up a bit of a fight due to rusting. He shoved it to the side with some force. Behind it was another door attached to the elevator itself. He held onto both sides of the elevator entrance as he tested the floor. It looked sturdy enough, and it seemed to hold his weight safely as he allowed himself to push down onto one foot and step his other one inside of the thing. He let go of the entrance and tried bending his legs slightly, then tried jumping very lightly in place. Robin held her arms across her torso, completely focused on him and the elevator. She had already grown several layers of few limbs below it as a precaution. Her heart beat faster as Zoro tried jumping in place in a more forceful manner. The elevator didn't swing one bit from the impact, remaining safely in place instead. He closed the door, proceeding to push a button. A rather ugly, rusty noise permeated the building as the elevator started up and began taking him one floor up. Robin grew her custom-made arms and legs upward along the walls of the construction through which the elevator traveled. She ensured it wouldn't have much space to fall before she could slow its fall. Zoro stayed inside of it for a few seconds before he finally made up his mind. All right, he called out, his voice echoing across the chasm of the building. Seems like we can take this thing upstairs. Robin pushed the folding door on the lower floor closed, and she called down the elevator again using a button nearby her. Zoro opened the door in front of himself for her, as she pried open the folding door on her side of the contraption again. Usopp, you taking the stairs? He quirked his eyebrow at his friend. Usopp made himself important, adopting a self-aggrandizing posture. I mean, Brooke and Frankie definitely need my help scouting all of these 100 floors before the Celestial Archive. My skills are far too numerous for me to be relegated to the top floor, so I hope you can understand if I stick to my duties down here. Zoro grinned. He looked at Robin flirtatiously. Guess it's just you and me then. As Zoro closed the door behind Robin, she wasted no time pushing the button which leads to the top floor. The three other pirates stood in a stunned silence as the metal casing and chains traveled upwards and disappeared. Droning metal noise disappearing up into the air. Usopp turned around and threw a blank look at Brooke and Frankie. Are we gonna pretend we didn't just see him make that face at Robin? Frankie didn't move his head beyond an inch or two, to look up a little, thoughtfully. His brain gears turned, before he responded with a definitive yes. Somewhere in the distance, a piece of rubble fell off a marbled stone railing and tumbled onto the floor. It echoed with the timeless sound of dilapidation. Brooke put his hand to his chin in thought. Maybe that's what all this drama's been about. The three began to walk the rest of the floor they found themselves on. Usopp ran after Brooke, trying to catch up to his long-legged strides. Drama. Brooke ignored him. I'll have to ask Zoro-san if he can tell me anything about her panties. Usopp and Frankie screamed in unison, "You're focused on the wrong thing here." Usopp insisted on some answers. "Drama. What are you talking about? What drama? What happened off the ship? It's better if I don't incite gossip. You'll just have to ask them yourself." The skeleton had started walking, Usopp had been running to catch up to him and get his attention. The long-nosed Straw Hat was not satisfied with Brook's reply. "Oi oi, what did you mean by that?" 1. Inviting. Look. Flirtation. Why are you asking a skeleton about human interactions? I've been dead a while, you know. Yohohohohohoho. Robin wondered how her legs could continue to work in this state. She leaned against the elevator, ignoring how laden with dust it was. The notorious demon hunter had placed his hands on the elevator walls on either side of the creamy, soft arms of the so-called devil child. He had done this the moment they were far enough up the elevator that they had complete privacy. "Zoro," Robin said, as he took her by the waist carefully. "It's nice that you're back to feeling frisky." He planted his lips on the contour between her neck and collar. "But you hurt me by leaving without telling me what happened yesterday." He lifted his head away again slowly, then looked at her. His eyes darted very slightly to the side in thought, as he considered what she had said. "I would have told you what happened if I had any idea myself," he said, looking back into her eyes. Robin couldn't help but notice a softness in his expression that was reserved for people he was very close to. It usually made an appearance at parties, often while he was drunk, or when he was particularly at home with his friends. Zoro noted how she wanted to be mad with him and yet seemed incapable. Instead, she looked slightly uncomfortable and uncertain. Robin continued, "You didn't have to leave, even if you had no idea." She straightened her legs, towering over him in her. "I don't want you seeing me at my worst," he replied, quietly, unfazed by the centimeters her heels added to her already giant body. "You don't have a worst, it's a part of you. And I want all of you with me." She rested her hands on his warm shoulders and held his indomitable gaze. His face was red again as he thought for a second again. "I'm not big on vulnerability, in case you haven't noticed." "Do you think I am?" Robin asked neutrally. Zoro snorted gently. He recalled how the only time he had seen Robin genuinely vulnerable was when she was about to be executed by the world government. "No, we're both a bit bad at this, aren't we?" Her voice blossomed with suppressed laughter as she spoke. "You might say that." He grinned. "I had a weird dream tonight." The swordsman developed a faraway look as he spoke. "Guess you could call it a nightmare. Luffy said your screaming had woken everyone in the men's cabin this morning." "I was going to ask about that. It was pretty weird. I dreamt about my childhood." Kuina appeared. "That Tashigi chick randomly showed up, too. Stabbed me clean through the guts." "Tashigi? You mean that naval officer?" "Yeah, she freaks me the hell out. Looks and talks just like my late friend." "Do you think this dream means anything?" Zoro hesitated. He sighed. "I think it might be why I had some issues last night with you." Robin and Zoro ignored the breathtaking view from the elevator as it traveled on, continuing to fixate on each other. Zoro sighed, his heart pounding uncontrollably. Deep inhale. His mind blanked out. Deep exhale. Tried to remember how to construct a sentence again. "The only woman I've kind of relied on in my life, until I met you, is Nami." Robin tried to process what he was telling her. "Before you say anything, she's like my sister," he said blankly. "So, you also grew up without a mom?" Robin said solemnly. "Kuina's one of the few friends I've had who the opposite sex, too. I can understand how what we have going on would be a lot for you to digest, then." The elevator had stopped, yet they stood oblivious to the fact. Robin pondered some more, before she spoke again. Zoro noted for the briefest of seconds, that there was a slight abnormality in her voice. The vulnerable tremble of a child. Something he hadn't even heard at Eni's lobby. "I've never been as terrified as I am with you." He let her words sink in, shock coloring his expression. He didn't know what to say. She continued, "Do you know why?" Of course he didn't. She disconnected from her emotions again as she spoke, her voice regaining its usual more cordial style. "I've never wanted to live as badly as I do now. I don't know how it happened, or when I became so profoundly attached to you." She smiled with a hint of sorrow flickering in her pupil. "Trying to keep up appearances. It's exhilarating, but it's horrific. My love for the crew, in combination with how addicted to your presence I am, I've never had this much to lose before." Her hands had gradually floated back down, tracing his arm. It had drifted gracefully from his shoulder to the space next to her hip. She felt comforted and somewhat amused by his mischievous expression before he even had a chance to speak. Boy, you're not going to lose us. He smirked, his brows in a familiarly aggressive position. Not on my watch. She couldn't help but chuckle. He opened the door, exited through it and held it for her to walk through as she spoke. If you take another unnecessary risk for us that could kill you, I will personally follow you to hell and take you out myself. You know that, right? Yeah. He walked alongside her into the grandiose enclosure before them. That's why I take the risks. He grinned provocatively. She glanced over at him authoritatively, and in annoyance, completely unable to hide her deep amusement. And that's the end of What If the Straw Hats Lost in the Middle of the Sea. Please like, subscribe, and share Aronow TV for more videos about One Piece fanfiction.